My name is Gerald Whitlock, and the day my company celebrated my 40 years of service was also the day I realized my only son had stopped seeing me as his father. The ballroom lights dimmed as the MC stepped toward the podium, smiling at the hundreds of employees, executives, and guests gathered inside the downtown Indianapolis Convention Center. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced, "today we honor a man whose integrity has shaped this company for 4 decades." The giant screens behind her filled with photographs from another lifetime. There I was in 1985 wearing an oversized hard hat. Another photo showed me alongside coworkers whose faces had since vanished from this world. After that came shots from the company picnics, volunteer days, charity drives, and going away parties, where I'd been the one clapping for somebody else. Today the applause was for me. It rolled through that ballroom. I held a polite smile, but I couldn't stop my gaze from sliding toward the front row. A single chair sat empty. A small white card rested on it, reserved for Kevin Whitlock, my son. The camera caught where I was looking. The crowd caught the camera. Nobody needed it explained. That seat was meant for family. What filled it instead was absence. The MC saw. She came toward me softly. "Mr. Whitlock," she said, "should we give it a few more minutes?" I shook my head. "No." A beat passed. "Would you like someone else to sit beside you?" My eyes moved to the back of the room. A young man stood there, clearly on edge, dressed in a charcoal gray suit that clearly wasn't expensive, but had been carefully pressed. He held his hands clasped together. He wore the look of a man who wasn't certain he had any right to be there. I smiled. "Caleb." His eyes went wide. "My late best friend's son." Heads turned his way. "Would you come sit with me?" Caleb looked almost frightened. "Me," I nodded. "Your father would have been sitting there if he were still alive." A hush fell over the room. Caleb made his way slowly down the aisle. He took the seat beside me. I laid a hand on his shoulder. "Thanks for coming." The words barely made it out of him. I wouldn't have missed this. "Welcome back to Dad's Revenge. Glad you're here with me today." Before we get into the story, drop a quick comment and let me know. What's the weather like where you are right now? Whether you're wrapped up inside on a cold day or catching some sunshine, I'd love to know who's listening. Now, a quick note. Some elements of this story have been shaped for the telling, and any resemblance to specific real people or events is purely coincidental. What matters most is the truth at the heart of it. 5 minutes later, the CEO returned to the microphone. He smiled at me, then glanced over at Caleb. "There is one final surprise." I frowned. Nobody had mentioned anything about a surprise. The CEO went on. "Years ago, Gerald Whitlock quietly turned down several executive bonuses and asked instead that the company establish a legacy fund honoring loyalty, sacrifice, and service to others." A murmur moved through the ballroom. Today, the CEO said that fund officially begins. He paused. The first recipient was personally selected by Gerald. Caleb looked confused. So, today the CEO smiled warmly. Caleb Merritt will receive an $800 to $1,000 legacy gift. The ballroom erupted. People rose to their feet. Some cheered, others wept. Caleb froze. "I think there's been a mistake." The CEO laughed softly. "There hasn't." Caleb covered his face with his hands. I simply squeezed his shoulder. "You earned this." 3 hours later, I was sitting alone in my 12-year-old pickup outside my small ranch house. My phone kept buzzing over and over. When I finally checked it, 112 missed calls stared back at me. Most were from Kevin. The rest came from his wife Brenda, unknown numbers, distant relatives, even reporters. I held the screen and looked at it for a long moment. Then I set the phone face down on the passenger seat because the story everyone had just watched on television had actually started years before. Until 6 years ago, I never imagined my family would drift apart. My wife Carol and I had built a simple life. Nothing glamorous, nothing anybody would envy. Just honest work cookouts in the backyard, camping trips every summer, Saturday night, Burgers Church on Sunday mornings. Kevin grew up in that little brick house, convinced we weren't wealthy. The truth was, his mother and I simply believed money was for building security, not for show. Carol passed away after a short battle with pancreatic cancer. Kevin was 31 at the time, already married, already laying down roots of his own. Losing her shifted something in both of us. For me, it left silence. For Kevin, it built distance. At first, I told myself that was to be expected. People get busy careers, get demanding marriages, take work. Life pushes forward. I understood that. I truly did. I never expected him at my door every week. I didn't need a holiday dinner every month. I only wanted us to still be father and son. Instead, our conversations slowly became scheduled events. Dad, can I call you later? Dad, we're tied up this weekend. Dad, maybe next month. Months folded into seasons. Seasons folded into years. Whenever Kevin did come by, Brenda always seemed ready to leave. She wasn't rude, not in any obvious way. She simply carried the air of someone fitting me in between vacations, brunches, and social obligations. I never placed all the blame on her. Marriage reshapes priorities, but somewhere along the way, my son had stopped thinking for himself. Whatever Brenda wanted, that became Kevin's position too. I saw it in small things. He stopped fishing with me, stopped dropping by for football, stopped seeking out my opinion. Even birthdays were reduced to text messages. Still, I kept quiet. Parents don't keep score, good ones anyway. Then about 3 months before my retirement ceremony, the company announced something nobody had seen coming. The board wanted to recognize employees with 40 years of unbroken service. Only 2 people qualified. One had retired quietly abroad. That left me. The communications team wanted interviews, old photographs, television coverage. Our local news station planned to air portions of the ceremony live, given that the company had grown into one of Indiana's largest employers. Honestly, a handshake and a sheet cake in the break room would have suited me fine. But the CEO insisted. "You've spent 40 years taking care of this company," he said. "Now let us take care of you." A week later, I drove out to Kevin's house. He came to the door in golf clothes. Brenda was already loading suitcases into their SUV. "Heading somewhere?" I asked. "Weekend in Kentucky." Kevin smiled. "Before you take off?" I said, handing him the invitation. He opened it. His eyes went wide. "They're televising this, apparently," he laughed. "That's pretty cool, Dad. I'd really like you there." He glanced at Brenda, then back at me. "Of course I'll be there." He pulled me into a hug. I wouldn't miss it. I believed him every word, because no matter how grown your child gets, part of you still holds on to the promises they make. I had no way of knowing that just 24 hours before the ceremony, my phone would ring, Kevin's name would appear on the screen, and one short conversation would change everything. Kevin's name sat there for a few seconds before I picked up. I already sensed something was off, or maybe I should say something had finally become clear. "Hey, Dad," he sounded upbeat, too upbeat. "Everything all right?" I asked. "Yeah, listen, Brenda found this incredible last-minute deal." I said nothing. "It's a luxury resort out in Palm Springs," he went on. 5-star place. We leave tomorrow morning. Tomorrow morning, the morning of my ceremony. I leaned back against my kitchen counter and looked out the window. The maple tree Carol and I had planted 25 years earlier moved softly in the evening breeze. "I thought your ceremony started in the afternoon," Kevin said quickly. "But we'd already booked the flights." "You haven't booked them yet," I replied quietly. A long silence followed. "No, so you could still come." Another pause. Then I heard Brenda's voice from somewhere nearby. "Babe, tell him they'll understand." Kevin dropped his voice. "Dad, we've both been pushing hard lately. Brenda really needs this." I smiled, though there was no one to see it. "I understand." "You do?" "Yes. We'll celebrate next week. Take you somewhere nice." "That sounds fine." "You aren't upset?" "No. Really." "I'm 70 years old, Kevin." He gave a nervous laugh. "I guess you've learned not to sweat the small stuff." If only he knew. We said our goodbyes. The house settled into quiet. I stood holding the phone well after the call was over. Carol used to say something to me whenever Kevin let us down as a teenager. "Don't react while you're still hurting. Wait until your head is clear." She was always the wiser one. So I didn't call Kevin back. I didn't fire off a guilt-laden text. I didn't say a word about how much his absence would sting. Instead, I opened my contacts and found another name, Caleb Merritt. Caleb picked up after the second ring. "Mr. Whitlock, I hope I'm not interrupting your dinner." "Not at all. I have a favor to ask. Anything." Not a moment's hesitation. That alone made my throat tighten. "My company's holding a ceremony tomorrow. I remember you mentioning that. My son won't be there." Caleb went quiet. "I'm sorry. I'd like someone sitting beside me." A brief pause. Then softly, "You want me there, I do. I'd be honored." No questions, no excuses, no checking his schedule, no asking what was in it for him. Just, I'd be honored. I smiled for the first time all evening. "Your father would have been proud of you." His voice broke. "I hope so." I'd first crossed paths with Caleb nearly 30 years earlier. Back then, he was just a wiry little kid tearing down the neighborhood sidewalk on his bicycle, while his father, Frank Merritt, worked the grill out back. Frank wasn't simply a coworker. He was my brother in every sense, but blood. We'd both started at Lakeview Industrial Systems within 6 months of each other. Same factory floor, same impossible supervisors, same mandatory overtime. We bought our first homes within a year of one another. Our wives became close friends. Our sons grew up playing together. Some of my finest memories are of Frank laughing so hard he couldn't get through the punchline of a story. He had this big rolling laugh that pulled everyone else in with it. The kind of man who never walked into a room without making it warmer. Then came the explosion. It happened during a maintenance shutdown. A faulty pressure valve, the wrong place at the wrong moment. Everything unraveled in seconds. Metal screamed. Steam swallowed the room. I couldn't see anything. Something massive hit the floor beside me, then again. I remember going down. I remember thinking this is it. But Frank didn't head for the exit. He came toward me. He hauled me across the concrete while alarms tore through the building. The doctors told me later that another 30 seconds in that room would have been the end of me. Frank never brought it up afterward. Whenever someone called him a hero, he'd just shrug it off. You'd have done the same. Maybe I would have. Maybe not. I'll never know. Because he never gave me the chance. Years later, cancer finished what that explosion couldn't. Watching Frank slip away one hospital visit at a time was among the hardest things I've ever endured. The night before he died, he sent everyone else out of the room. It was just the two of us. He reached over and took my hand. "Look after my boy," I nodded. "You won't have to ask twice." He smiled. I knew that. Those were the last words he ever said to me. Caleb was 19 years old then, too young to lose his father, too proud to reach out for help. He worked evenings stocking shelves at a grocery store, took classes at community college during the day, delivered pizzas on weekends. Every time I put money on the table, he turned it down politely but firmly. "I'll figure it out." So instead, I found other ways to be there. When his old pickup finally gave out, I connected him with a retired mechanic who rebuilt engines for next to nothing. When he transferred to Indiana University's engineering program, I put him in touch with people who helped him find affordable housing. When he graduated, I was in the audience. Not because anyone expected it, but because I'd made a promise to his father. Life, though, had its own ideas. Caleb discovered he had a passion for mentoring kids more than engineering. He became a public school robotics teacher. Some people thought he was throwing his degree away. I didn't see it that way. Every Christmas he sent me a handwritten card. Every birthday he called without fail. Whenever my gutters needed clearing or my furnace started acting up, Caleb somehow knew before I said a word. He'd just show up with a toolbox in hand. Figured you could use another set of hands. That's the man he grew into, not because anyone recognized him for it, but because that's who Frank had raised. The following morning, I arrived at the convention center early. Caleb was already outside waiting. He wore a suit that had clearly been through several weddings and funerals, but he stood taller than most of the executives filing through those doors. "You clean up pretty well," I told him. He laughed. "It's the only suit I own. It looks perfect." He passed me a small gift bag. "You didn't have to bring me anything." "It's not much." Inside was a small hardcover notebook. The first page held one line in his handwriting. "Some men earn promotions, others earn respect. You taught me the difference." I couldn't find words for a moment. Then I looked up. "Your father would be proud." Caleb smiled. "I've spent 20 years hoping to hear you say that." Before we headed inside, my phone buzzed. Kevin had posted a new photo online. He and Brenda were standing beside a gleaming resort pool, oversized sunglasses on, drinks in hand. The caption said, "Finally taking the vacation we deserve. Life is too short." Thousands of miles away, they were grinning. I quietly locked my phone and turned to Caleb. "Ready?" He nodded. "As ready as I'll ever be." Neither of us had any idea that within the next 2 hours, everyone watching that broadcast across the country would see a surprise none of us saw coming. The ballroom felt even grander once every seat was filled. More than 400 people had come out that afternoon. Executives, factory workers, office staff, retired employees, community leaders, a handful of local reporters. 2 television cameras rolled silently near the stage as technicians murmured into headsets. The whole thing felt polished, carefully arranged, far more than I had ever imagined. Caleb and I sat together in the front row. He kept looking around as though he expected someone to tap him on the shoulder and tell him he was in the wrong place. I leaned over. "Relax, I'm trying." You look like you're about to sit a final exam, he laughed. I speak in front of classrooms full of teenagers every day. Somehow this feels worse. Trust me, I said. Teenagers are tougher. That finally got a real smile out of him. A few chairs down sat members of the executive board. Most of them had been alongside me for decades. Several gave me a nod. Others came over to shake my hand. One by one, they offered their thanks. But every few minutes, someone's gaze drifted to the empty chair that had been set aside for Kevin. Nobody asked where he was. Nobody needed to. The vacant seat said everything. At exactly 2 bars, the lights went down. The room fell quiet. A video began rolling across 3 large screens. There I was, 27 years old, hair so full I barely recognized myself, standing beside the first production line I'd ever been put in charge of. Another image came up. Carol and I at the company Christmas party in 1990. She wore a green dress she'd found on the sale rack because we were watching every dollar for Kevin's future college fund. I smiled at the memory. She had looked beautiful. The next photograph was Kevin himself at 7 years old, wearing an oversized hard hat on Family Day. He'd declared he wanted to work with Dad one day. My chest tightened. Funny how things turn out. The crowd applauded as each decade rolled across the screen. 40 years. It looks effortless when it's squeezed into a 5-minute slideshow. Only I knew how many missed weekends were behind those images, how many overnight shifts, how many birthdays marked a day or two late, how many quiet sacrifices filled the gaps between those photographs. The MC returned to the stage. Gerald Whitlock has become more than an employee, she smiled. He became the standard everyone else measured themselves against. More applause followed. Then she welcomed our CEO Douglas Fenton to the podium. Douglas wasn't a showy man. He'd started out sweeping warehouse floors while putting himself through college. He'd worked his way up to running the company. Part of why we respected each other was that neither of us had ever lost sight of where we'd come from. He adjusted the microphone. I've spent 31 years working alongside Gerald. He looked over at me. In all that time, I never once had to wonder whether he'd do the right thing. He paused. Sometimes doing the right thing cost him promotions. The audience shifted. Douglas went on. He passed up executive opportunities because taking them would have meant uprooting his family and moving across the country. I smiled. That was the truth. Carol never wanted to leave Indiana. Neither did Kevin. So, neither did I. Douglas gestured toward the room. He also declined performance bonuses more than once. I frowned slightly at that. We hadn't talked about him bringing it up. He wasn't supposed to go there. Douglas smiled as if he'd read my mind. I know Gerald isn't fond of the spotlight. Laughter moved through the crowd. But today isn't about keeping him comfortable. It's about setting the record straight. One executive after another came forward with stories. A maintenance supervisor described how I'd stayed through the night during a blizzard because younger employees couldn't safely make the drive home. A receptionist told the room how I'd quietly covered the cost of her husband's medical equipment after his stroke. I hadn't counted on any of those stories surfacing. Honestly, I'd let some of them go from my own memory. Because when you do something for someone, you don't tend to hold on to it. You just move forward. Then Douglas called me up to the stage. The applause ran for nearly a full minute. Standing up there under the lights felt oddly wrong. I'd have been more at ease fixing a piece of machinery or sorting through inventory, anything other than being the one everyone was looking at. Douglas handed me the Lifetime Legacy Award, a heavy bronze plaque engraved with my name. 40 years. It hit me all at once. He shook my hand. You earned every day of it. Then the MC stepped back in. Gerald, she smiled. We noticed someone sitting beside you today. The giant screen landed on Caleb. His eyes went wide. The audience gave a warm round of applause. Would you tell us about him? I looked over at Caleb. He looked like he was hoping the floor might swallow him whole. I moved closer to the microphone. His name is Caleb Merritt. My best friend Frank Merritt worked alongside me for nearly 30 years. Several of the retired employees smiled at that. A lot of them remembered Frank. He pulled me out alive during an explosion at our old plant. The room went still. I kept going quietly. When cancer took him, Caleb was only 19. I glanced his way. His father asked one thing of me before he died. My voice caught. He asked me to look after his son. Caleb lowered his head. I never tried to take his father's place. I couldn't. But I've had the privilege of watching him grow into the kind of man every father hopes to raise. The room applauded. Caleb wiped his eyes. Then I added one last thing. If anyone deserved to fill my son's seat today, I smiled at him. It was Caleb, The room stood. Another ovation, longer, stronger, more weighted with feeling. I could see people dabbing their eyes, including more than a few executives. Just when it seemed the ceremony had wound down, Douglas stepped back to the microphone. Actually, he'd said with a smile, "We have one final surprise." I looked at him puzzled. None of this had been in the program. Douglas opened a folder. About 12 years ago, Gerald Whitlock came to the board with an unusual proposal. He scanned the ballroom. Rather than accepting future executive retention bonuses, he asked that those funds be directed into something that would outlast him. The audience leaned in. He called it the Legacy Gratitude Fund. Douglas smiled. His exact words were he opened the folder and read from a letter I had long since forgotten writing. Money disappears. Character doesn't. Help one good person, and they'll spend a lifetime helping others. The room went absolutely still. Douglas folded the letter. For years, this fund quietly grew. Additional company contributions, investment returns, private donations from retired executives. Today he paused. It has reached $800,000. Gasps swept the ballroom. I stared at him. Even I hadn't known what the total had become. Douglas smiled. The agreement gave Gerald one right. He alone would name the very first recipient. Every camera swung toward me. Douglas looked directly at Caleb. Caleb Merritt. Caleb looked as though he'd stopped breathing. "Please join us on stage." He got to his feet slowly. His knees were visibly unsteady. When he made it up to us, Douglas extended his hand. "On behalf of Lakeview Industrial Systems, it is our honor to present you with the first Legacy Gratitude Award. $800,000. Caleb just stared. His voice disappeared. "I can't accept this." Douglas smiled gently. "You already have." Caleb turned to me. His eyes brimmed with tears. Why I rested my hand on his shoulder. "Because your father once saved my life." I smiled through my own tears. "And because you've spent the last 20 years honoring his." The room rose again. This time the applause seemed like it might never stop. I had no idea that somewhere in California, Kevin and Brenda had just watched every second of it on live television. I didn't leave the ballroom right away. After the clapping finally died down, dozens of people closed in around Caleb and me. Colleagues I'd worked alongside for years wanted photographs. Retirees pulled me into hugs. Former supervisors' men, who had once made me nervous as a young mechanic, queued up just to shake my hand one final time. "I've never seen a ceremony like this," a woman from Human Resources said. Another employee laughed. "I think half the room was in tears." I smiled politely. "I wasn't expecting any of that. I believe you," she said. "That's exactly why everyone loved it." Caleb still looked as though he hadn't quite landed back on Earth. Every few minutes he'd murmur the same thing. "I still can't believe this." I eventually pulled him aside. "Listen to me." He looked up with wet eyes. "That money isn't a reward for one afternoon." "What do you mean it's recognition for the man you've spent 20 years becoming?" He shook his head. "I don't even know where to begin thanking you. You already have. How you showed up." He looked puzzled. I smiled. "Sometimes that's the most anyone can offer." About 20 minutes later, Douglas came over holding 2 cups of coffee. He passed one to me. "You okay, I think so." He laughed. "I've known you a long time. Too long. You've been working very hard not to think about your son." I sighed. "Is it that obvious only to old friends?" We stood near one of the ballroom windows looking out over downtown Indianapolis. Finally, Douglas asked, "Do you want our media team to pull any mention of Kevin from the coverage?" I turned it over in my mind. The broadcast had shown the empty seat plainly. People would have questions. Reporters have a nose for stories that write themselves. An elderly father, an absent son, a surprise legacy gift. The kind of thing social media practically feeds on. "No," I said finally. "Are you sure?" "I don't want anyone going after him." Douglas nodded. "But you're also not asking us to cover it up." Exactly." He put a hand on my shoulder. "You're a better father than most men would manage to be." I wasn't certain that was true. Good fathers don't always raise good sons. Sometimes they just keep on loving them regardless. Caleb insisted on following behind me in his car to make sure I made it home all right. He laughed when I pushed back. "You've looked after me for 20 years. The least I can do is return the favor for one afternoon." We drove north through the afternoon traffic. When I pulled into my little ranch house, he parked right behind me. We stood out in the driveway talking for nearly half an hour. "What are you going to do?" I asked. "About what, the money?" He stared down at the ground. "Honestly, I haven't gotten that far yet." I figured you'd have a list ready. He smiled. My students. That didn't surprise me. Our robotics program barely holds on every year. We lose kids because their families can't afford the equipment. He paused. I want every child who loves engineering to have a real shot. Then he grinned. And maybe replace my 12-year-old pickup. I was wondering when you'd finally admit that. He laughed. It's making some very troubling sounds. You've earned yourself a newer truck. No. He looked at me steadily. My father earned that. Those words hit me somewhere deep. Frank would have smiled hearing his son say them. After Caleb finally headed out, I walked into my house. The quiet felt familiar like an old coat. I loosened my tie, hung my jacket in the closet, and set the bronze plaque carefully on the fireplace mantel beside Carol's photograph. I looked at her smiling face. You would have liked today. For a moment, I could almost hear her reply. Then my phone started buzzing across the kitchen table. Once, twice again, then again. I frowned. Unknown number. I let it go. Another call. Kevin. I ignored that one too. Then Brenda. Then Kevin again. The phone kept going. I finally picked it up. The notification screen went on and on. Missed call, voicemail, text message, another voicemail. When I scrolled to the top, I added them up. 112 missed calls. I stared at that number a moment. Then the phone rang again. Kevin. This time, I picked up. Hi, son. His breathing sounded rushed, almost frantic. Dad. Yes. Why didn't you tell me? I looked around my quiet kitchen. Tell you what, the money. Oh, $800,000. Yes, you knew. I knew there would be a gift. You never told me. You never asked. Silence. Then Dad, Brenda, and I are heading to the airport. I thought you were enjoying your vacation. We're leaving. No need. Dad, you've already spent money on those flights. This isn't about the vacation. Then what is it about? He hesitated. He couldn't answer. Not right away. Finally, in a low voice, I should have been there. I closed my eyes. Yes, I made a mistake. You did. Another long silence. Then quietly, are you angry? I thought before I spoke. No, you're not. I'm disappointed. There's a difference, a considerable one. Anger tends to pass. Disappointment settles into the bones. Brenda suddenly came on the line. Gerald. Hello, Brenda. I think we've all gotten a little carried away here. What do you mean people online are making Kevin look like some kind of terrible son? I haven't said anything to anyone online. I know, but that empty chair. What about it? It embarrassed us. I took a slow breath. No. What? It didn't embarrass you. She sounded thrown. You embarrassed yourselves. Silence. Then she snapped. You could have warned us. I invited you. That's not what I mean. I know. Her tone turned colder. People are saying Caleb deserves that money more than Kevin. I said plainly. That's because Caleb was there. She made a sharp sound. So, that's it then. What, you replaced your own son? No, I kept my voice level. Kevin replaced himself. She had nothing left to say to that. She handed the phone back. Kevin spoke quietly. Dad. Yes, I'm coming over tonight. I'll be here. I love you. The words caught me off guard. He hadn't said them in months, maybe longer. I love you too. The call ended. Within hours, clips from the ceremony were spreading everywhere. Local stations ran the announcement on a loop. National outlets picked the story up. Comment sections went wild. Many people praised Caleb. Many admired the Legacy Gratitude Fund. Others kept returning to the empty chair. Complete strangers shared accounts of parents who had given everything only to be set aside by their children. Reading those comments sat uneasily with me. People had witnessed one afternoon. They didn't know my son, not truly. Kevin wasn't cruel. He wasn't wicked. He wasn't by nature a selfish person. He'd simply spent too many years telling himself there would always be another chance, another birthday, another dinner, another call, another ceremony, another tomorrow. Life has a hard way of proving that wrong. As dark settled outside headlights finally swung into my driveway. Kevin had come home, but he hadn't come alone. Brenda stepped out of the passenger side with him, and one look at her face told me this conversation was going to be a good deal more complicated than I'd pictured. I watched Kevin climb out of the SUV with his shoulders rounded, looking older somehow than he had that very morning. Brenda got out behind him, but unlike Kevin, she wasn't carrying regret. She was carrying anger. Kevin stood quietly at the edge of my driveway. Brenda came straight toward the front porch. Gerald. She called before I'd even touched the screen door. We need to talk. I unlocked the door. You'd better come inside." Neither of them said a word as they stepped into the house. Brenda took in my living room as though she were seeing it properly for the first time. The same worn leather recliner, the same brick fireplace, Carol's favorite knitted afghan, folded neatly over the couch, the family photographs covering one full wall. Kevin stood looking at those pictures for a long moment. There he was at 6 years old, proudly holding his first soccer trophy. There he was at 16 just after getting his driver's license. There we were, side by side on his college graduation day. His mother stood between us, beaming so brightly it still ached to look at it. Kevin swallowed. "I haven't been here in a while." "No," I said quietly. "You haven't." The room went still. Brenda was the one who broke it. "I'll just say what we're both thinking." Kevin looked her way. "Brenda." "No." She crossed her arms. $800,000. You've known Caleb for years. You could have at least said something." I poured 3 glasses of iced tea and set them on the coffee table. Nobody touched theirs. "I didn't know the amount." "But you knew there was money." "I knew there would be a gift." She leaned in. "And you chose someone else's son." I held her gaze. "I chose someone who showed up." Kevin shut his eyes. "Dad." Brenda turned toward him. "Don't just sit there. He should have told us." Kevin looked worn through. "Brenda." "He humiliated us in front of the whole country." "No." Kevin shook his head slowly. "We humiliated ourselves." She stared at him. "What he invited us." We said no. Her expression hardened. "So, you're taking his side, now I'm taking the truth." The room went quiet. For the first time since she'd walked in the door, Brenda had no quick answer. Kevin finally looked over at me. "I owe you an apology." I nodded. "You do." What comes next is one of the hardest moments in this whole story, the kind that forces a man to look at the people closest to him and ask how much they truly understood about what he sacrificed. Before we get there, tell me this. If someone you loved only realized your worth after the whole world was watching, would that be enough for you, or would it be too late? "I'm sorry, I believe you." He looked surprised. "You do?" "I believe you're sorry." I paused. "I just don't know what you're sorry about." He frowned. "What do you mean, are you sorry because you hurt me? Or because everyone else witnessed it?" He didn't answer. Not out of stubbornness, but because he genuinely didn't know. I got up and walked down the hallway to the spare bedroom. When I returned, I was carrying 3 old storage boxes. Kevin recognized them right away. "I haven't seen those since Mom." His voice trailed off. I set the boxes down on the coffee table. "Open them." He slowly lifted the lid on the first one. Inside were folders, receipts, old envelopes, handwritten notes. "What is all this?" "Our life." He picked up a faded tuition statement from Indiana University. His name was printed across the top. The balance had been stamped paid in full. Another envelope held canceled checks one after another, semester after semester, books housing meal plans. Kevin looked baffled. "I thought my scholarships took care of most of it." "They covered some." "I never knew that. You weren't supposed to." He dug deeper into the box. There were mortgage documents, the down payment for his first house, the loan I'd quietly co-signed before taking my name off it 2 years later. There were invoices from his wedding, the photographer, the florist, the reception hall. Kevin stared at one receipt. His eyes went wide. "Dad, you paid for this." "I helped. I thought Grandpa no." He looked up at me. "You never said a word. What would have been the point? Parents don't raise children expecting thank you notes in return. We do it because that's who parents are." Kevin lifted the lid on the second box. Inside were dozens of photographs, some faded along the edges. One showed Carol stitching patches onto his Little League uniform after a 10-hour nursing shift. Another showed me replacing the aging roof on our own house because hiring a contractor would have meant delaying Kevin's college savings. There were camping trips in place of expensive vacations, birthday cakes baked at home rather than ordered from a bakery. Not because we couldn't occasionally do more, but because every extra dollar already had somewhere to go. Kevin's future. Kevin picked up a photograph of Carol beside our old minivan. I remember that car. It had almost 200,000 miles. "You always said you liked it." I smiled. "I couldn't stand it." He laughed through his tears. "Then, why didn't you get another one?" "Because replacing the transmission cost less than your freshman textbooks." His shoulders started shaking. He looked down at that photograph for a long while. "I never knew any of this." "I know." The third box held something different. Letters. Dozens of them. Every birthday card Carol had ever written to Kevin before she passed. every Christmas note, every little handwritten message tucked into his lunch during elementary school. Kevin carefully opened one. Her handwriting filled the page familiar as ever. No matter how old you become, always remember that time is the most valuable gift you can give someone you love. His tears came then, real ones, not embarrassment, not panic, grief, regret. He buried his face in both hands. I've become the man Mom warned me not to be. Nobody spoke. The quiet said everything that needed saying. A soft knock broke the moment. I opened the front door. Caleb stood there with a small cardboard box in his arms. "I'm sorry," he said. "I didn't realize you had company." "It's all right." Kevin got to his feet. Caleb immediately looked like he wanted to back out. "I can come another time." "No," Kevin said. "Please stay." Caleb stepped inside. He set the box down on my kitchen counter. "I brought dinner," I laughed. "You didn't have to do that. I figured after a day like today, nobody stopped to eat." That sounded exactly like his father. Kevin watched the whole exchange. He noticed something I don't think he'd seen before. Caleb knew where I kept the plates. He knew which cabinet held the glasses. He even knew the back burner still clicked 3 times before it lit. Not because he lived there, but because he'd been coming by, helping quietly, showing up for years, while my own son had been too occupied to. Kevin looked at Caleb. "How often do you come here?" Caleb hesitated. "I'm not sure. Every couple of weeks," I said on his behalf. "Sometimes more." Kevin nodded slowly. "You've been looking after my dad." Caleb shifted uncomfortably. He looked after me first. Brenda suddenly stood. "This is unbelievable." All 3 of us turned toward her. So now everyone's supposed to make Kevin out to be some terrible son. Nobody said anything. She grabbed her purse. "I'm not staying here for this guilt trip." Kevin looked at her. "You should go." She blinked. "What? You heard me." "Kevin, I need to stay. For him, for me." She stood looking at him for several long seconds before walking out the front door. The slam carried through the whole house. Kevin didn't go after her. Instead, he turned back toward me. For the first time in years, he wasn't looking at me like a duty. He was looking at me like his father. After Brenda left, the house felt strangely calm. No one rushed to fill the quiet. Kevin sat at the kitchen table with his elbows on his knees, eyes on the wooden floor. Caleb quietly unpacked what he'd brought. Homemade beef vegetable soup, fresh rolls from the bakery a few blocks away, peach cobbler, the kind Carol used to make every fall. "I hope you don't mind," Caleb said. "I figured today was too big a day for fast food." I smiled. "Your timing couldn't have been better." We sat down together. 3 men, 3 very different stories. For the first few minutes, no one said much. People sometimes imagine that a real reconciliation needs a perfect speech to set it off. Life rarely works that way. More often, healing starts somewhere as ordinary as a shared meal. Kevin was the one who broke the quiet. "I honestly can't remember the last time we ate together like this." I looked at him. "It was Thanksgiving." He frowned. "No, 3 years ago." His face fell. "I thought it had only been a year." I nodded softly. Time has a way of moving faster than we expect. That sentence sat over the table longer than anything else we'd said all evening. The week that followed felt different. Kevin called every morning, not asking for anything, not explaining himself. Just, "How are you today, Dad?" At first I wasn't sure whether it was guilt doing the talking, but guilt wears out eventually. Consistency doesn't. Monday turned into Tuesday. Tuesday turned into Friday. The calls kept coming. One afternoon he pulled up carrying 2 fishing rods. "I found these in my garage." I recognized them without thinking. One was his, the other was mine. I figured maybe he paused. "If you're free Saturday." I smiled. "I've been free for years." His eyes filled. "I know." That Saturday we drove out to the same small lake where I'd taught him to fish when he was 8 years old. The old wooden dock still tilted slightly to one side. The paint had worn thin. The benches had been swapped out. Everything else felt the same. Kevin cast his line out over the water. "I forgot how still it gets here. That's why I keep coming back." He looked out at the lake. "I used to think success meant owning the biggest house, taking the nicest vacations, driving the newest car." He gave a quiet laugh. "I spent so much time going after things that I stopped making room for people. I let him talk. He needed to hear himself say it. My whole life you showed up." He looked at me, and "I stopped showing up for you." I nodded. "Yes. I'm ashamed of that." "I know. You're not making this easy." "No," I smiled gently. Forgiveness isn't the hard part, trust is. He took that without pushing back. That alone told me something was shifting in him. In the meantime, Caleb's life had been turned upside down. News stations kept picking up the story of the Legacy Gratitude Fund. Parents wrote in to thank him for going into teaching. Former students posted online describing how he'd pushed them toward engineering. Rather than stepping back from the attention, Caleb put it to use. He announced that nearly half of the award would go toward scholarships for students pursuing robotics, engineering, and skilled trades. "I wouldn't be standing here," he told reporters in one interview, "if someone hadn't believed in me long before I believed in myself." He never brought up my name unless someone specifically asked. That was typical Caleb. He always deflected the praise towards someone else. A month on, he invited Kevin and me to see his classroom. Teenagers crowded around half-built robots' computer screens and workbenches. One young girl came over quietly. "Mr. Merritt says you're the reason we got new equipment." I laughed. "No." I pointed toward Caleb. "He's the reason." She smiled. "He says you taught him generosity." Caleb caught that from across the room. He looked over at me. Neither of us said a word. We didn't need to. Frank would have understood. Kevin started coming over every Sunday. Sometimes we watched football. Sometimes we worked in the yard. Sometimes we just sat on the back porch with our coffee. He never carried himself as though one apology had wiped out years of distance. Instead, he did something harder than apologizing. He kept showing up. One afternoon, he arrived with a small toolbox. "What are we fixing?" I asked. "The fence. It isn't broken." He smiled. "I know, I just wanted an excuse to spend the day with you." I laughed harder than I had in months. "You finally sound like my son again." Brenda never came back. She and Kevin separated quietly a few weeks later. No dramatic courtroom battle, no screaming matches, no revenge. Just two people who'd grown into different lives and were honest enough to admit it. One evening, Kevin let something out. "I don't blame Brenda." I looked over at him. "I made my own choices. I kept choosing convenience. I kept assuming you'd always understand." He shook his head slowly. "I confused your patience with permission." That may have been the wisest thing he'd ever said. Several months after the ceremony, Lakeview Industrial Systems invited me back for the dedication of the Legacy Gratitude Mentorship Program. The company had chosen to build on the original fund, turning it into an annual initiative that paired seasoned employees with young people stepping into skilled trades and engineering careers. Douglas smiled as he welcomed the room. This all began because one man believed character should outlive a paycheck. This time, when I walked into the auditorium, the front row seat beside mine wasn't empty. Kevin was already sitting there. He got to his feet the moment he spotted me. "I wanted to make sure I got here early." "You certainly did." "I wasn't going to miss this one." He smiled a little sheepish. "Not for anything." Caleb sat on my other side. I looked at the two young men flanking me. One connected by blood, the other connected by a promise. Something settled in me right then. Family isn't weakened by gratitude. It's strengthened by it. The ceremony itself carried far less weight than the first one had. No surprise gifts, no television cameras trained on an empty chair, no stunning announcements, just dozens of young apprentices shaking hands with mentors who genuinely gave a damn about their futures. And honestly, that meant more than any headline ever could. Walking toward the parking lot afterward, Kevin stopped beside my truck. "Dad?" "Yes." "Thank you." "For what?" "For loving me, even when I made it hard." I rested a hand on his shoulder. "Being your father was never the hard part. What was waiting for you to find your way home." He pulled me into a hug, the kind that lingers long enough to carry everything words can't. For the first time in years, I felt my family knitting itself back together. Not because money had transformed anyone. Money hadn't mended a single relationship. Choices had. Time had. That hug in the parking lot said more than any speech ever could. And for Gerald, that was enough. This story cost Gerald years of quiet sacrifice, bonuses, forfeited pride, swallowed hurt, carried alone. He never asked for recognition. He just kept showing up. I believe God has a way of bringing the truth to the surface exactly when it needs to be seen. And this was one of those moments. The gratitude that finally came wasn't loud or dramatic. It arrived in a parking lot in a long hug from a son who had finally found his way home. Here is what I take from a story like this dad's revenge. Never confuse someone's patience for permission. The people who love you most are often the quietest about how much they give. If you want to know someone's character, watch what they do when no one is looking, not when the cameras are on and the applause is loud. Gratitude is not weakness. Offered honestly, it is the one thing that can rebuild what years of distance have worn down. And if you have drifted from your father, your son, your family, do not wait for a ceremony to close that gap. The door is open longer than you think, but it will not stay open forever. If this family revenge story moved something in, you please leave a comment below and tell me what hit you hardest. Share it with someone who needs a reminder that it is never too late to choose the people who matter. And if you haven't already subscribed to Dad's Revenge, there are more stories here, just like this one, waiting for you. Thank you for spending this time with me. I'll see you in the next one.